Look around the world. Skin color is the most obvious thing that sets us apart. From the deep tones of Africa to the pale skin of Northern Europe and every shade across Asia and the Americas. Visually, it looks like we come from completely different worlds. But our DNA tells a very different story. Top geneticists have proven one undeniable fact. We all share the exact same starting point, and the original ancestors of every modern human alive today had dark skin. This isn't just some theory, it's a historical fact, hardwired right into your genome. So, what exactly happened? How did we go from one universal default setting to losing that original skin tone and evolving into the massive spectrum of colors we see today? Well, the answer isn't just about sunlight, it's actually about one of the most brilliant survival hacks in evolutionary history. To understand this, we have to rewind about 2 million years. Picture the sun-baked savannas of Africa. Our ancestors were facing a massive survival problem. To hunt across long distances in the blistering equatorial heat, they needed a way to cool down. So, nature made a trade. We shed our thick coats of body hair, replacing them with an incredibly efficient cooling system, sweat. It worked. We stopped overheating. But turns out, it exposed a fatal flaw. Suddenly, our fragile, bare skin was completely unprotected. It became a direct target for the sun's brutal ultraviolet radiation. Left unchecked, the rays would absolutely shred the DNA inside our cells. To prevent this, the human body activated the ultimate defense mechanism. It engineered a permanent, built-in biological sunscreen, melanin. Specialized cells went into overdrive, flooding the skin with melanin and turning it into a rich, dark shield. This shield absorbed the radiation and neutralized the threat. Here's the thing. For the first few 100,000 years of human history, dark skin wasn't a racial label. It wasn't about identity. It was literally a suit of evolutionary armor. The absolute perfect default state to keep our ancestors alive under a punishing sun. Everything was working perfectly until about 60,000 years ago. Our ancestors packed up and started migrating out of Africa, pushing north into uncharted territories across Asia and Europe. But the further they moved from the equator, the more the sunlight dropped off. They were hit with long, gloomy, sun-starved winters, and suddenly, that evolutionary armor that kept them alive in Africa, it became a massive liability. It all came down to one critical thing: vitamin D. See, human bodies can't just make vitamin D out of nowhere. We absolutely need UV light to hit our skin to kickstart the process. We need it to absorb calcium, to build strong bones. But up in the cold northern hemisphere, the sunlight was already incredibly weak, and now it was hitting that thick melanin shield. The great protector was suddenly blocking out what little UV rays were left. The result was a full-blown biological crisis. Kids were developing rickets. But the most brutal impact was on women. Without enough vitamin D, their pelvises couldn't develop properly. The bones became narrow and deformed. In a prehistoric world with zero medical care, a narrow pelvis was a death sentence during childbirth. Mothers didn't survive, and the genes that coded for their dark skin were permanently buried with them in this new land. So, nature had to make a ruthless pivot. Anyone born with a random mutation, someone who just happened to produce a little less melanin, suddenly held the ultimate winning ticket for survival. Less melanin meant they could absorb more UV rays. They synthesized enough vitamin D. The women developed strong pelvises, survived childbirth, and successfully passed that lighter skin down to the next generation. Our biological coat literally faded, latitude by latitude. Depending on how far north a tribe migrated, this forced adaptation created a massive, fading gradient of skin tones across the continents, marking the second great turning point in human evolutionary history. If skin color was just a simple math equation about sunlight, well, it would be pretty predictable. But nature isn't some rigid machine. And human evolution, it is full of some absolutely wild cheat codes. 1. The Arctic diet hack. Think about the indigenous Inuit people living in the freezing Arctic. Winters there are brutal. They spend half the year in almost total darkness. Based on the sunlight theory, they should have the palest skin on the planet, but they don't. They have naturally darker skin. So, where did this paradox come from? The answer is on their dinner plate. The Inuit survive on a massive diet of fatty fish, seal liver, and whale blubber. And it just so happens these foods are absolute vitamin D bombs. Their diet literally did the sun's job for it. Since their bodies were already fully loaded with vitamin D from their food, their skin never faced the survival pressure to fade. They essentially ate their way out of a harsh evolutionary rule. 2. The agricultural trap. If a meat-heavy diet was a life raft, the agricultural revolution was a massive trap. One that actually hit the fast-forward button on changing human skin color. About 10,000 years ago, our ancestors largely ditched hunting and gathering. They started farming. Their main food sources became wheat, barley, and corn. Great for filling your stomach, but completely empty of vitamin D. Almost overnight, that dietary safety net vanished, and suddenly, that massive survival pressure was thrown right back onto their skin. Without the backup supply from wild game, ancient Eurasian farmers had to shed their melanin at breakneck speed. They had to trade away their biological armor just to scrape up every last drop of weak sunlight hitting their fields. 3. The Neanderthal shortcut. This biological wardrobe change got another massive boost from a historical cheat code. When Homo sapiens first stumbled into these freezing new lands, they ran into the Neanderthals. These locals had already been surviving in the cold for hundreds of thousands of years. Instead of spending tens of thousands of years evolving from scratch, our ancestors just interbred with them. Because of that, we basically borrowed the specific genes for lighter skin and a cold weather immune system. This genetic shortcut allowed modern humans to hack their way into a new environment in the blink of an eye. Turns out, our skin color wasn't just molded by the sun, it was shaped by what our ancestors ate and the neighbors they happened to meet along the way. Ever wonder why both Northern Europeans and East Asians have light skin? If you're thinking they share some ancient pale ancestor up north, you'd be wrong. The truth is, nature doesn't hand out a copyright on skin color. Faced with the exact same survival problem, a massive lack of sunlight, both European and East Asian bodies found a solution. But they took two completely independent paths to get there. Geneticists discovered that European skin got lighter mostly because of a mutation in a specific gene. It basically hits the brakes on melanin production. But here's the crazy part. That mutation is almost completely missing in East Asian population. So, how did East Asians do it? Their bodies hacked into totally different genes to dial down the melanin. It's like you and your classmates solving a brutally hard math problem using completely different formulas, but you both get the exact same answer. Biologists call this convergent evolution, and it proves one hard truth. Light skin isn't an exclusive gift handed to one specific group. It's just a biological workaround, a solution that nature had to invent at least twice to keep humans alive. And here is the most fascinating part. What happens if a group of people already lost their melanin in the cold, but their migration route looped them right back into brutal, blistering sunlight? Look at indigenous Australians or the people of South India. Their ancestors also migrated out of Africa, passing through varying climates that actually dropped their melanin levels. But when they finally settled down for tens of thousands of years in areas with extreme UV radiation, nature didn't hesitate to flip the defense switch back on. To save their bodies from the scorching sun, the melanin factory was aggressively rebooted, once again, forging a dark protective shield. Turns out, skin color isn't some permanent tattoo bound to a specific race. It works exactly like the volume slider on your speaker. Sun too harsh? Nature cranks the melanin slider all the way up. Sun too weak? Nature turns it down so you can catch every single ray of light. No copyrights, no fixed settings. Just a beautiful, relentless adaptation of the human body. For centuries, humans have used skin color to draw lines of division. We tied it to class, intelligence, and superiority. But the story hidden in our DNA proves the exact opposite. Nature never created that hierarchy. So, the next time you look at someone's skin tone, remember, it tells you absolutely nothing about their value or who they are. What it actually is a biological map. It strictly records three things: how far their ancestors traveled from the equator, how much sunlight they absorbed, and what was on their dinner plate in prehistoric times. Skin color isn't a measuring stick for superiority. It is an epic chronicle of human survival, because beneath that biological armor, no matter the shade, deep down, we are all descendants of the exact same group of brave travelers, the ones who walked out of Africa tens of thousands of years ago. So, which evolutionary hack blew your mind the most? The Arctic diet or the agricultural trap? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And if you want to keep decoding the beautiful mysteries of evolution, hit that subscribe button. I'll see you on the next journey.